So we are still in Matthew 26 at the Passover meal. We have talked about Judas. We talked a lot about Judas, and we talked about started talking about the Passover meal last week. Sarah, did we, excuse me for not remembering this well, did we talk about the 4 items necessary for the Passover feast?
I don't think we got that far.
Okay, all right. So I wanted to kind of sum up the Passover feast a little bit as far as the significance of some of the symbols in it. And remember back, I think it was back when we were doing, before the pandemic hit, we were planning on doing
A Passover dinner.
Yeah. Thank you. So
And I bought the little plate that has the little divided sections for all the stuff we're supposed to have. I'm ready.
All right, well, we're going to keep our fingers crossed and keep that on our agenda. So
Nancy, I never even owned one of those.
Oh. Okay, so have any of you ever done a Passover meal besides Claire?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it is and we've talked about this before, it is a very interesting and very ceremonial process. So anyhow,
where I did it was a Baptist church, so there was no line.
Oh, okay. Well, I did one when I was in college, and then I did one, I don't know, it's been since my divorce. So sometime about 15 years ago, I guess, at a Jewish synagogue, at the synagogue that used to be here on Parham, and now it's on Patterson. But anyhow, so did one there. So anyhow, so I wanted to talk about some key elements in a Passover feast. So one of them is a bowl of salt water, okay, which has to be set up on the table. And that salty water reminds the participants in the meal of the tears the Jews shed when they were slaves in Egypt, and of the salt waters of the Red Sea when God brought them through those waters. Okay. And remember Jesus, and talking about Judas, what turned out to be Judas, talks about dipping his hand in that water with me, whoever dips his hand in the water with me. Another key element in the Passover feast is a collection of bitter herbs that had to be prepared ahead of time. And I've seen different recipes, but it can include horseradish. Usually the recipes I've seen include horseradish. It can also be chicory, endive, lettuce, horehound. I've seen parsley, but it has to have a bitter taste to it. And Claire, if there's anything you want to add, because you know much more about this than any of us, so please do.
And I think for practicality reasons, I only ever saw the curly leaf parsley because that's all that was available.
Yeah, yeah. So that the bitter herbs was to remind them of the bitterness of slavery, and a bunch of hyssop with which the blood of the lamb had been smeared on the lintel and the doorpost. So to remind them of that was used. And then a third key element is a paste called chereshef, a mixture of apples, dates, pomegranates, and nuts. And it was to remind them of the clay, which they had been compelled to make bricks of in Egypt while they were slaves. And through it, there were sticks of cinnamon to remind them of the straw with which the bricks had been made. So when I've had it before, it was just ground cinnamon mixed in with the apples, dates, pomegranates, and nuts. And then lastly, there's 4 cups of wine at a Passover meal. So I know the one at the synagogue, I was pretty looped by the time. So, huh?
I'm in.
So it wasn't Manischewitz, I guess.
All right, so the 4 cups of wine were to remind them of the 4 promises from Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 through 7. And that those 4 promises from God were, I will free you from the burdens of the Egyptians and deliver you from slavery. I will redeem you with an outstretched hand and with mighty acts of judgment. And I will take you as my people and I will be your God. All right. So, so there's a lot of preparations that go into a Passover meal. And so with it being, of course, we think of it as Thursday evening, but, you know, with the Jews, the tradition is the day starts at sundown. So the Passover meal is in the evening, and so it's considered to be Friday. And it's always in the month of, is it Nisan or Nisan? On the 15th of Nisan. So it's a set date that Passover is held in the Jewish calendar. So, all right. So to give a little context for the Passover meal. So, all right. So we are on page 398 of the book now, in chapter 26 of Matthew, verses 26 through 30.
I thought we were 395.
Yeah.
Did we read that passage? We didn't read the first passage, did we?
No.
Sorry, I missed this passage. Whoops. Okay, so
We've
Susan,
been talking about it already.
yeah, all right. All right, so
Yeah,
Susan, go for it.
Okay. So Matthew 26, 17 through 19, the ancestral feast. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus, where they said, do you wish that we would make the necessary preparations for you to eat the Passover? He said, go into the city to such and such a man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover with my disciples at your house. And the disciples did as Jesus instructed them and made the preparations for the Passover. And then whatever Kathy said.
Right. So this is it, and Barclay talks about this later on, but it struck me as about this, that, you know, on the day that Jesus entered Jerusalem and they got the donkey, and he's like, yep, there's this guy that's going to have this donkey that, you know, just go and get it from him. And then here it is time for the Passover meal. And he's like, yeah, there's this guy that's going to let us use his room for our Passover meal. So he goes and gets his room. And then,
How would they know who is such and such a man?
Well, they went to different houses.
No, that was when he was born. They had to go to different tables.
I thought, I misunderstood. I thought
He
they
said, "What?
go out and find
it
something.
said,
Go to the city to such and such a man
Oh, okay.
and say to
Right.
him."
Oh, okay.
yeah. So verse 26. Let me see what my Jerusalem Bible says.
Where I was going with my misunderstanding is I thought they were going to house until somebody would invite them in to do it. And the message I was getting there was be prepared.
Oh no,
Well,
it sounds like
I
Jesus was saying there's this particular man to go to.
I didn't hear it right.
And then,
It kind of reminds me of the story about the donkey that they rode in on Palm Sunday, you know, that
Yeah.
go to so-and-so and they'll
right,
have a,
right. So that was the first time.
At least
And
they gave him a hint that you're going to see a donkey with a colt next to it, you know, and now there's no hint at all of how to find this such and such guy.
yeah, he says, go to this. Yeah, my Bible says, go to this certain man. So, and then Barclay says that he, in his interpretation, sees that there's a third time that through the kindness of someone, after the meal, when Jesus and the disciples go to Gethsemane to pray, all right, Barclay is saying that in the city of Jerusalem, things are so built, you know, there's no room, nobody has any gardens in the city. So the wealthy had their own individual gardens on the Mount of Olives where Gethsemane was. And so it would have been through the kindness of one of the owners of one of those gardens that Jesus was able to go and pray in the garden. So there's 3 times that these unnamed people, Barclay says, have supported Jesus in a material way during this passion story.
I think it's probably highly likely that the names were just lost in the course of time. And that by the time they wrote the Gospels, it was like, well, what was his name? I don't know. Just put,
Yeah.
you know, so-and-so or such and such.
He wanted to be anonymous.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions or comments anybody wants to add about Passover meal? Of course, we know there's lots of other rules, like, the lamb that was prepared, all of it had to be eaten during the meal. You couldn't have any leftovers. There couldn't be any leftovers.
And remember,
Wasn't there also go ahead, Sarah.
last week when I was talking about the number of people in Jerusalem, we learned that there was a law that there had to be at least 10 people eating on a lamb. You couldn't have a lamb for a small group. So that was also part of it.
I was gonna say, I don't remember ever eating lamb. It was always chicken, but I think that's because the people I would have been eating with would only have been able to afford a chicken. And at the same time, there was one bottle of Manischewitz wine, the Concord grape, that was so sweet, you can't imagine. And that's all there was, because it was always said, wine's expensive, wine's the most expensive thing at this meal. And it was the one bottle. So that's probably why nobody got too carried away, because they're just, you were splitting that up amongst, quite a few people.
Right, wisely so. And some movies I've seen, the table set for the Passover meal, it's just a little glass. It's not, like a big wine glass.
So are there also some ritual questions, or isn't there like a routine where the youngest child has certain questions that they ask the elders and they get kind of walk through the Passover story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's when I did it at the synagogue, there's a book that everybody just has that you use as your guide if you don't have it memorized, that you use as your guide for the Passover meal. So somewhere in this house, I still have that copy, but you can get them, it's just a little, the little choir, hymn, Christmas carol books that we used to get to go. It's sort of like that. So
we definitely need to do a Passover dinner.
Yeah. The youth group for several years has done a modified one as during right before Easter. So
Not if you're gonna have lamb.
well, Claire, I'm glad to know that chicken can be an option.
It was, if you were staying with someone, if you were having it with somebody who went all out, it was what they call flanken. That was flank steak. So you would have beef, but I don't ever remember it being lamb.
Well,
So
that's
I
where we
remember
said,
a Christmas pageant one time. We had a Christmas pageant one time where Jerry Rope roasted lamb, because I remember the smell of rosemary wafting out into the fellowship hall. And I think, were you the
I was part
innkeeper's
of it.
wife?
I was part of the cast and got to actually eat.
Okay, he was talking about that not too long ago. About
we
he
could
would,
have, we
talking
could
about
have
making
that,
that meal.
we could
Yeah,
have
Harold?
venison, we could have venison that tastes a lot like lamb.
I'll taste like chicken.
I'll stick with Bud.
I just want some decent wine.
Well, I think it has to be red.
And not vintage Tuesday.
Don't disrespect Manischewitz. I use that for my fruitcakes.
Oh, ooh, I bet that makes them good. All right, so shifting gears. Because the next passage is critical. It's a critical passage. So, and Barclay titles it His Body and His Blood. And this is a passage that we all know pretty much by heart. But what I'd like for us to do, because Sarah, you'll be reading it. I really like for you to listen. David did this for the book discussion the other night on a passage that he read. But for you to listen and listen for what stands out for you today. You know, it might be something that stands out, that it might be different half an hour from now, but listen for what strikes your soul today as Sarah reads this.
While they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them. "Drink all of you from it," he said, "for this is my blood, the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many, that their sins may be forgiven. I tell you that from now on, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in the kingdom of my Father." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
So the symbols in this passage mean a lot to us. What struck you today about this passage?
I never noticed that, or never paid attention to the phrase poured out for many as opposed to poured out for all.
That has bothered me for a long time. Who's not on the list?
Mhm.
I think you have to put yourself on the list. I think anybody can put themselves on the list, but you're not automatically on it.
Well, I also think at this point, Christ is still talking about saving the Jews. You don't hear him talking about going to the Gentiles until after the resurrection. Now, I know some people can say, oh, because he went across the Sea of Galilee and hit the shore over there, he was going to the Gentiles, but it doesn't say that at all. And the only time that I think he starts talking about going out to the Gentiles is after the resurrection. So I'm just wondering if he's still not talking about, he's trying to save the Jews by some, the word some.
No, I think he's basically talking about the many being those who have accepted Christ and the new faith that he brought and who are believers now. I think that's what he was talking about, and a recognition that not everybody will believe.
Wasn't there a turning point in his ministry when he met the woman at the well, and then he started to rethink who was included?
Cindy made that point, but it was the Syrophoenician one who was begging for crumbs from the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
When Jesus went, oh, okay, yeah, maybe you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's about in Mark, somewhere around Mark 6 or Mark 7, where supposedly a lot of people believe he started, changed the whole ministry and was going out to the Gentiles. But I think that is some pretty thin evidence. In fact, I don't even see it. Just because he was nice to someone, I mean, when was he not nice to someone that came up to him? No matter what. I mean, even he talks about the Good Samaritan, as in nobody likes Samaritans either. But he didn't say go out, I just think that is really thin evidence for those who want him to, they're fashioning his ministry to their desires.
I think before we also hear that he is saying, I came not for the people who believe, I came for the people who don't believe. You know, I came for the people that are sinning, you know. And here it says, poured out for many that their sins may be forgiven. You know, so it's I guess all of us are sinners, but you know, you know, that's what's confusing to me. You know,
I mean, all of us are sinners, but I guess then the difference is we believe as opposed to sinners who do not believe.
Well, but again, he came to the Jews. I mean, that's multiple times in the gospel. He came to the Jews.
I guess we better stop being Christians because we aren't Jews.
No, I mean, again, that changed, you know, after the resurrection, he told the disciples to go out and minister to all the lands, all the people of all the lands. But that was not the case before that point that I could see. I mean, we can make up anything, we can believe anything we want, and I'm not sure it's wrong to believe one thing or the other in that case, but I think the evidence is pretty doggone thin that he changed his ministry until it's obvious, and it's after the resurrection, unless someone else can show me a verse or something that I haven't found.
Well, I guess, Harold, what I'm struggling with, then if that's the case, then what are we supposed to do with all the rest of the gospel?
I don't know what you mean. What do you mean?
If the contention is that Jesus' ministry prior to the resurrection was just for Jews, then what do we do with it? We're not Jews.
Until after the resurrection, then he said, go out to all the lands until all, you know.
So now it's opened.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the way I read it. Yes. Because I mean, again, you know, I want to see it in black and white. I don't believe in this making up stuff and reading between the lines and putting thoughts in Jesus' head that's not there. I see, you know, what I see is it's after the resurrection, he said, go out to all the lands, to the Gentiles, which, you know, obviously were included. But before that, I mean, he talks about, I came to Israel, I came to the fatherland, you know, over and over, he talks about, he came to the Jews. And they were the first ones he was trying to convert and show the new way, and that where they've been wrong, especially the Pharisees. But you know, again, it may be something somebody can show me, and I'll be a converted person, but I haven't seen it.
So what's the significance of all that?
Well, I mean, we're learning and discussing.
Okay.
I mean, we started talking about, you know, the well, the many is, you know, it evolved from the many, and you know, versus all. The conversation began with that, and I'm still, you know, just saying. I think we're talking about. He's talking about the Jews.
All right, I went to get my parallel gospel, you know, that has the 4 gospels set up so that you can compare them real easily. And both Matthew and Mark say, which is poured out for many. Matthew includes poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Mark doesn't have that, doesn't say that. Luke doesn't have it at all. It just says he took the bread, and when he given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body. So he doesn't include that at all.
There's a word before all that, for the covenant. And I think that might mean anybody who believes.
Yeah, I mean, if we go to John, in the John 6:50, it goes into the explanation of what he was even talking about then, because if we remember, many of his disciples left because they thought he was talking about cannibalism at that point. No joke. And John, I think it's John 6:50, kind of explains sort of where he's coming from, what he's talking about when he's talking about the blood of the covenant and the body and that type thing.
Well, and remember what the Jews usually did at Passover. They had to give a sacrifice, right, of a lamb. We were talking about all those lambs earlier in the chapter, and all the blood and how many lambs that would be and whatever. And here he's talking about his blood being shed as the sac, you know, and I know that you're going to get on this too, that his blood is being shed at the Passover, like the sacrifice.
Right. Yeah, and Barclay, so yeah, I wanted to get into what Barclay says about these symbols in this passage. Does anybody else want to comment on what stood out for them in the reading of this passage? We've got some good discussion. All right, so Barclay talks about, you know, throughout Judaism, the use of, and the prophets, the use of symbols has been very important. And so lots of symbols here. First of all, he talks about the Passover feast itself, the symbolism of it, that it's a commemoration of deliverance, that the whole intent was to remind the people of Israel how God had liberated them from the slavery of Egypt. And then he also, and that Jesus then claimed to be the great liberator, and that he came to liberate us from fear and from sin. And that then the Passover lamb was the symbol of safety. And I hadn't really thought about it in these terms, but so the lamb became the symbol of safety because on the night of destruction in Egypt, it was the blood of the Passover lamb which kept Israel safe. Remember with the branch of hyssop wiping the blood on the doorway so that people knew which houses they would be safe. So, and then Jesus was claiming to be a savior, that he came to save us from our sins and their consequences. He had to come to give safety on earth and safety in heaven, safety in time and safety in eternity. So then Barclay talks about the covenant, that he spoke of his blood being the blood of the covenant. And of course, a covenant's a relationship in this situation between God and humanity. And it's a new relationship between God and all people. We talk about that all the time. So Barclay is paraphrasing Jesus to be saying, because of my life and above all, because of my death, a new relationship has become possible between you and God. That you have seen me, and in me you have seen God. And I have told you, I have shown you how much God loves you. He loves you enough even to suffer this that I am going through. That is what God is like. So opening up a new relationship, a new covenant. Anything anybody wants to add about those symbols? And of course, we use the symbols of the bread and the cup.
When the pandemic started, I took tape and went around all over the doors and put little crosses.
Oh, wow. It's those little symbols that, of course, we're in a season of symbols right now. We have symbols all over our houses. And what meaning we give those symbols, I think affects our quality of life.
And symbols, the most doors have a cross.
Uh-huh.
Windows, crosses.
Yeah. Indeed.
Yep, look at the door behind me. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a cross there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny how at different times that cross stands out more than other times.
Yeah.
You know, the days that I see it and days that I don't. So,
In a previous chapter too, we've been going through Jesus's real attack on the Jews, on the Jewish people, or at least the Jewish leaders. I mean, there was a whole chapter where he was attacking and saying, you're going to be forgotten. It's going to be the other people that are going to have the benefit because you don't believe. I mean,
Yeah.
like we spent a whole chapter on that
uh-huh.
before this.
Yep. So now, so he's talked about all that, and now he's saying there's this new relationship, a new covenant, and are we gonna, he's challenging us, are we gonna be open to that?
He started that at the transfiguration. Remember when they wanted to build the small, pillars, and he said,
Mhm.
God wants to be worshipped in spirit, not in the physical. So that was, to me, that was the beginning of this idea of the new covenant. There was a
Mhm.
covenant not of the old, of the blood and of the sacrifice, but there's something new. It's all spiritual, which
Mhm.
is why I think some people believe his message was very much Essenian, because it was all about spirit and not physical. But anyway, Gail tells me I got to be quiet.
Keep
Never.
talking, Harold, keep talking.
Keep talking. All right, I want to interject one last thing about from the last verse in this passage. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Barclay talks about how part of the ritual in the Passover Feast is singing of what's called the Hallel. How do you pronounce it, Claire? Hallel, Hallel, Hallel. But the word itself means praise God, and it consists of Psalms 113 through 118. All right, and the last, and then at the very end, the great Hallel is sung, which is Psalm 136. So he's saying that that's the psalm that they sang before they went out to the Mount of Olives. So I wanted to read just a little bit of Psalm 136 so you can get the flavor of what that is. Alleluia. Give thanks to Yahweh, for he is good, for his faithful love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods, for his faithful love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his faithful love endures forever. And then it goes on, there's several more verses that include that repetition, for his faithful love endures forever. He alone works wonders. He made the great lights, the sun to rule the day. He struck down the firstborn of Egypt. He brought Israel out from among them. He split the sea of reeds in two, let Israel pass through the middle, and drowned Pharaoh, all of his army. He led his people through the desert. He struck down mighty kings. He gave their land as a birthright to his servant Israel. He provides food for all living creatures, for his faithful love endures forever. This is how it ends, give thanks to the God of heaven, for his faithful love endures forever. And that's how the Passover meal would have ended for the disciples and Jesus, and singing that. And then they went out to Gethsemane to pray. And also Barclay talks about how the Passover meal was a real meal. And we now commemorate that with one little piece of bread and a teeny little cup of juice. And we've talked before about how in the early church, it was frequently the custom to have a meal anytime they gathered together. And so, that really got me thinking about how, when we say we're having meals together, that we seem to do that a lot. Well, that's part of what we're asked to, the symbolism, is having a meal together, the power in the remembering of the covenant and having that meal together. So Barclay makes the statement that he's telling us that every time we sit down to eat a meal, that meal is in memory of him. Jesus is not only Lord of the communion table, he must be Lord of the dinner table too. So that
Yeah,
statement
I
brought
like
to mind, yeah, the power of saying grace at meals. You know, that I know myself, I get lax on that, but the power of saying grace at meals.
It's really touching. I know when I'm out at a restaurant or something and I see a family saying grace before they eat.
Mhm.
We know the first CWF night group goes out to dinner, and we always say grace before when we're out in the restaurant. Even if there are 20 of us sitting at the table, and if you're at the far end, you don't hear it. Every head is bowed, and
Yeah,
so it's cool.
yeah. You know, and that when we were kids, that was not something that was done in public.
No.
It's only been what, maybe the past 10 years, 10, 15 years,
No, no,
longer than that or more recent than that?
no, longer. I
Long-
remember I remember as a child, well, as a teenager, going out and seeing families pray.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
I guess I was really wondering if there's anything written about it with regard to the church after Jesus was gone, and what percentage of the church grew from Paul's work with the Gentiles or the other disciples' work with the Jewish people. How, because what we see now is that it's separate. Okay, there's Jewish and there's Christians. So what percentage of Christianity came from the original Jewish group at 100 years after Jesus's resurrection? Where did the majority of the church grow from? Did the Jewish people just most of them stayed Jewish, or did they transfer over? What really happened, as a result?
I read a lot of Bart Ehrman, or watch videos with great courses that he's done. I'd say 95% of it came from the Gentiles.
Mhm.
And so Jesus originally came for the Jewish people, but what were the results of Jesus coming?
Most of them stayed Jewish, and there were followers of the light, but they stayed within the Jewish fold.
And there are Jewish people who believe,
Right, Messianic Jews.
Messiah.
But I read, and I don't remember if it was Ehrman or not, but read somewhere that that what really made it was the destruction of the temple. That really separated things. The Jews went back to being Jews, and the Christians left. If you were going to be Christian, you left the Jewish fold. But after the destruction of the temple, you didn't have much in the way of Jewish followers of the light.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Paul's letters, Paul's letters are the earliest history of the church that we have. And they're written to mostly Gentile groups.
Yeah.
And think about Acts and Peter and Paul's discussions with each other in Acts, about circumcision, about whether or not you had to be circumcised to be a Christian.
Or keep kosher.
Yeah. Yeah. The food laws, the laws about food and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. That was a powerful dream for Peter, about whether or not you had to keep kosher.
And I think too, that if you were from a Gentile background, there would be, you know, repercussions for becoming a Christian, because again, you were participating in something that was not generally looked upon as, you know, favorable. But if you came from a Jewish background, you would be thrown out of the temple, your family would quit you. It was the consequences were far greater. So I would imagine most of the growth did come from the Gentile.
And
I
it
wonder
would
if-
make sense, it would make sense to me because they would be leaving a pagan religion and not particularly attractive, and whereas the Jews, they still had God. The pagans didn't really have much of anything, in my opinion. I guess, I don't know.
Well, the pagans, were not exclusive. You know, worship our God, we don't care how many gods you worship, as long as you're, you know, worshiping at least, you know, the Roman emperor. If you want to worship your God and our God at the same time, that's fine. They weren't exclusive.
Yeah, there were lots of,
Yeah, there was no
gods.
exclusivity. That was one of the things that was unique with Judaism and Christianity, was the exclusivity.
Mhm.
And if you worship our God, you can't worship those gods.
right.
The pagans
I-
were not exclusive.
Going back to the destruction of the temple, and I've got a couple books I'm looking forward to reading and finding out more about this, but from a sort of a social behavior sociology kind of thing, I would wonder if with the destruction of the temple for the Jews, that was a symbol that was core to their faith. You know, that was a central place. And so so when that temple was destroyed, it'd be like if the Washington Monument had been destroyed, or if the Capitol had been destroyed, or the White House had been destroyed on 9/11. What would that have meant to us as Americans for that core symbol to have been damaged, to have been destroyed?
And not just the symbolism of the temple, but when the temple was destroyed, that was the end of the sacrificial system, because the sacrifices had to be made at this temple. There was nowhere to make sacrifice anymore.
Yeah,
All of those rules, if you've read, is it Numbers or Leviticus, one of those awful books, there are just countless laws of this is how you do a sacrifice. There were no more sacrifices. So the synagogue became the center of their worship. So yeah, the way they worshiped God changed drastically at that point.
yeah, the Sanhedrin ended at that point. I mean, the whole traditional Jewish system was gone. So, you know, yeah, that was fundamental. And I mean, you know, it changed everything dramatically. And yeah, right. And then the synagogues began to fill in, but
All right, so it is 10:48.
That's fast.
I think we got 5 pages maybe on
Yep.
today. So I think
Sounds like us.
that sounds like us. But
Well,
what a
that's all
rich
that talking
discussion.
about food.
What a rich discussion today. Whoa. All right. What Barclay does, so Susan's next week.
Yes, next.
All right. So Barclay sort of reorganizes Matthew.
Just like he did with Judas, he's reorganizing some chapters for next week where he's going to concentrate on Peter.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yep. So and I think he has some interesting points to make about Peter.
Yeah, he put it in a whole new light when I was reading. I thought, you know, duh.
Yeah. Yeah. So next week's going to be a rich discussion too.
Yeah.
So, all righty.
Careful, you're talking about my Pope.